We are so pleased to have distinguished and, for most of you, I'm sure, very familiar guests with us today. I do want to do a very brief introduction of our speakers because even though most of you probably know them quite well, there are new people who have moved to Green Spring who may not know these dear friends of ours. So, in no particular order, I'd like to welcome Senator George Barker, who is our state senator representing the 39th Senatorial District, and that includes parts of Fairfax County, parts of Prince William County, and part of the city of Alexandria. Senator Barker was first elected to the legislature, to the General Assembly in November of 2007. In his most recent election, which was in 2019, he received 65.9% of the vote.
What was wrong with the rest of it?
That's right.
His academic background is in health policy and management. He and his wife Jane live in Clifton. And I do want to mention his committee assignments in the General Assembly because these are so significant. He is chair of the General Laws and Technology Committee. He also serves on the Commerce and Labor Committee, the Education and Health Committee, Finance and Appropriations, and the Rules Committee. Our other guest is Delegate Vivian Watts, who represents us. Vivian represents us in the House of Delegates, also the 39th District. So it's very easy to remember. We're in the 39th Senatorial District and the 39th District for the House of Delegates. Vivian's district is entirely in Fairfax County. She was first elected in November of 1995. She took a brief hiatus. No, that can't be right. It must be 85. 82. I'm out of practice, as you can see, so I apologize. She took a brief hiatus from the legislature and served as the Virginia Secretary of Transportation and Public Safety during the administration of Governor Belials from January of 1986 to January of 1990. Currently, she serves as chair of the Finance Committee. She is vice chair of the Courts of Justice Committee. She also serves on the Rules Committee and the Transportation Committee. In her most recent election in 2019, she received 68.4% of the vote. So it is a huge honor and pleasure to welcome them both back to Green Spring. The way we would like to do this program today, I've asked Senator Barker if he would begin by giving you an update on the Virginia Redistricting Commission on which he serves. I know people are curious about this. It has not gotten very much press lately. So he will give you an insider's view of the Redistricting Commission. Then we'd like to have Delegate Watts update us on anything significant that she would like to call to your attention from the two most recent General Assembly sessions, the Special Assembly session that Governor Northam called last August, which lasted through November, and then the most recent regular General Assembly session that convened in January. Then we would like to go back to Senator Barker for his thoughts on the General Assembly sessions, and then finish with Delegate Watts, who is on the ballot for re-election this November. Give her a chance to update you on her re-election campaign, and then we will hopefully still have time to open the floor for questions. So with that, I will turn the microphone over to Senator Barker for the Redistricting Commission.
All right. Well, I can tell you it's great to be here with you again. It has been a while since it was 2019 before the last time either Vivian and I were here to speak to the club here. It's great to see all of you. I will just make a little introduction here. I did have a little surgery earlier this week for some skin cancer. It's not the fatal kind. It's just some basal cell skin cancer. So I got a few little bandages floating on my face here. But anyway, want to talk. Was asked to talk about the redistricting commission. I want to thank you all for everybody here for voting for the constitutional amendment that we got passed in November. I worked on this issue for a number of years, tried different things, and was not getting too far. And then in 2019, came up with a proposal that did get bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate, and moved forward. And had to be passed in 2019 in both the House and the Senate. Then passed again in 2020 in the House and the Senate, where the outcomes were a little different. It was, I think it was 38-2 in the Senate voting for it, but the House was a little closer than that, and I think it was 54-46 on the final vote on passing it there. But it did pass, and then we got the 65%, a little over 65% passage in terms of when it went to the voters in November. So we have set up the redistricting commission now. The redistricting commission has basically, just to give you the main things on it, there are 8 legislators, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats from the House, and 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats from the Senate. And then there are 8 citizen members who were picked by a panel of 5 retired circuit court judges. So it was set up in a way to be balanced throughout the process between citizens and legislators there. For anything to pass, for the lines for the House of Delegates, or the lines for the state Senate, or the lines for the congressional representatives, you have to have 6 of the 8 citizen members and 6 of the 8 legislators voting for it to pass. So it's been set up where the citizens cannot control the legislators cannot override the views of the citizens. We have to work together to get it done. So we now have a commission that is operating, and we're going to have a meeting next Monday. It'll be our 4th meeting, I think, we've had. To sort of get started on the process, and it's slowed down a little bit, and I'll explain that in just a minute. But what is good is that we set it up so that the chair of the commission would be a citizen, and we decided to have 2 co-chairs. So we actually have 2 co-chairs, and it just so happens that the 2 co-chairs are the only 2 women who are citizen members of the commission. So, we got women's leadership directing things in the commission. But thus far, it's been a very positive atmosphere, a very positive set of discussions on things. What is going to happen is has been delayed in terms of the final outcomes on the district because normally we would have the census data by the 1st of March. And in fact, in 2011, we got the census data about the middle of February. So we had that data actually the 2nd week of February there. And we're able to start work pretty quickly and move forward on drawing districts. And that was good because we had districts that were drawn, then we had a bill that got vetoed, and then it had to go back out and redraw some of the districts, make some minor changes to be able to get it done. But this time we don't have the census data yet because the census data, partly because of the pandemic that came into effect, just before they were starting with Census Day, which is April 1 of 2020. Just before that was when everything started to, well, things were closed down here, I can guarantee you, back at that time. And they delayed substantially going out and contacting people in their homes when they did not respond to either the emails and the internet opportunities they had to fill out their census form, or to fill it out and mail it back in. So that was there. And then there were some other mistakes that were made at the Census Bureau, some issues with leadership of the Census Bureau. So we don't have all the census data yet. We don't have the census data yet, is basically what it boils down to. The full census data will be available by the end of September, but we will get advance copies of it that will have everything that will be in the full census data in the 2nd week of August. So what that means right now is that we do not have new districts that have been drawn. We are not drawing new districts at this particular point with the commission. And so therefore, those who are running for the House of Delegates, which is up this year, in 2011, both the House and the Senate were up, but every 10 years we're not up in the Senate because we have 4-year terms rather than 2-year terms. So this year, there's not elections for Senate seats, but there are elections for House seats. And as of right now, at least, what's moving forward is the House race, House of Delegate races being run in the districts that are the existing districts that are there. So we'll go beyond basically a 10-year period between census issues that are there before we get the new districts in line. What we will probably do is start in earnest in August on the commission. Right now we're setting things up for public hearings and a lot of that type of stuff. We're getting all the citizen members familiar with what they need to know to be able to enact, draw the districts, and being able to address a number of issues up front. But we will be in earnest in August, and hopefully I think we'll be pretty well prepared prior to when we get the census data, because there are estimates that are out there right now. And we will have 45 days from when we get the census data to be able to draw the districts for the legislative seats and for the congressional district seats. So that will be done. That will then have to come to the General Assembly for up or down votes. No amendments possible, but there's up or down votes on the maps that have been drawn in both the House and the Senate. And that provision was put in there basically because the U.S. Constitution basically leaves it to state legislatures to draw the districts. And there have been some rumblings that in some states where the state legislatures no longer are involved in any way, that the Supreme Court may well overturn the actions of the commissions in those states. So I and others decided we didn't want to have our effort to get a new constitutional amendment passed jeopardized by the risk that the Supreme Court would rule our process unconstitutional. This way, the legislature makes the final vote on things, which is the action that we're required to take. We've always been taking that way. It's just in the past we didn't have a commission and we didn't have citizens as directly involved in the process there. Hopefully, for Vivian's sake, she will be able to run in 2021, and then not again for 2 more years till 2023. There have been some rumblings that might or might not happen. She, as said earlier, she got elected in 1982, which was the middle of 3 years in a row that the members of the House of Delegates had to run.
Actually, 81, 2, and 3. I ran 3 times.
Oh, you ran all 3. Okay. You took office in 82 then. All right, so you ran in 81, 82, and 83. What had happened was that that time the courts had made clear that you could not have multi-member districts. The Senate obeyed the courts and drew single-member districts, so the Senate was all set. The House, however, decided, well, we like some of our multi-member districts, so we might decrease the number, but we're not going to get rid of them. And in Fairfax County, in the previous decade, there were 2 districts for all of Fairfax County, but you elected 10 different delegates, so 5 in the northern half of Fairfax County, 5 in the southern half of Fairfax County. And in 1981, what the General Assembly did was they drew 4 districts for Fairfax County, plus I guess it's Fairfax City and Falls Church in there as well. And you had 3 members each of those 4 districts. So you had 12 members who were being elected, but only 4 districts. And what happened was the courts then ruled that unconstitutional, but they said it's too close to the election date in November of 81. So therefore, you could run in these districts you've drawn for this one election, so 4 districts with 3 members each. But then you have to redraw districts and run again in 1982 in the new districts, and then run again in 1983 in those districts. So that's how she got her exercise, how she maintains her slim figure here and everything. So gets around and works hard, and as he was willing to run 3 years in a row for the same thing. So, but we should have that vote in the General Assembly in late September or sometime in the first part of October to be able to hopefully vote for the districts that the Commission comes up with. And those will go into effect for the 22 congressional elections, for the 23 Senate elections, and hopefully first time for the 23 House of Delegate elections as well. So that's sort of where we are on the redistricting right now, and I'll pass the microphone, or you can take your microphone there.
Excellent. So, yeah, that's the way it was.
That's right.
I'm
Well, you have it won't be.
hoping, and I don't have the words of our Constitution exactly in my head, but I'm hoping that the provision that says that the House of Delegates shall run in districts of the latest census in that November, that since that wasn't possible, that it won't be interpreted that there has to be a special election the following year, but that we can do, as the Senate does every other census, you don't elect senators from the new districts until 2 years later, rather than immediately. So fingers crossed,
Yes.
fingers crossed. So enough of that, let's talk about some of the issues. We've had an incredible time. It's honestly hard for me to remember all the things that we have done, because quite frankly, the roadblock that the House of Delegates represented for 2 decades has finally, of course, been broken with the chairmanship, and I think you all know Eileen Fillercorn's parents who live here in Green Springs, and under her leadership, under the majority, we have made such a difference. So let me just jump to some groupings of issues. We had a special session in the late summer, early fall. Its focus was on COVID changes, but also in large part because of George Floyd and other issues that finally were being dealt with. It was also very, very heavily emphasizing criminal justice reforms, which continued into the regular session. So let me jump into that category, because again, I have served on the criminal law subcommittee for years and years and years, and this has really been the heart of these issues. Some of the things that we did that are just historic by every measure. Virginia with Kentucky, only 2 states that have jury sentencing. Only 2 states. That goes all the way back over 200 years, because our English law history was that if it was a jury of your peers, that basically was a jury of the village, and the village knew you as much as they would know the facts of the crime, so that when it came to sentencing, it would be informed sentencing as far as the individual who has been convicted. Of course, that disappeared many, many, many decades ago. And in fact, you choose a jury that is totally impartial, not just a jury of peers, but a jury that's very impartial on the issue. So that finally breaking that, and now unless the defendant requests being sentenced by the jury, now it will be the judge who will do the sentencing. And the big difference is that a jury was not given the sentencing guidelines. The jury had no idea what the typical sentences were. They only knew what the code required. And that's what they had to sentence within, as opposed to the discretion of the judge, who could depart from the sentencing guidelines, which in Virginia reflect the typical practice throughout the Commonwealth. They're not dictated, but in fact they reflect the range of sentencing, which serves as guidance. But the judge also has the ability to suspend sentences, which the jury would not have. And so essentially, if I recall my figures correctly, jury sentencing tends to be twice as long as any judge sentencing. It is extremely rare for a judge to change the jury sentence, and therefore, most people did not exercise their constitutional right for a jury of their peers. So this is a major, major historic breakthrough, but another major breakthrough is that 23 other states have ended the death penalty, and Virginia has now joined with the 23 other states. We have only 2 people on death row, and but prior to that, especially if you go all the way back to colonial times, Virginia exceeds any other state in the number of people who have been put to death with the capital punishment. And even in modern times, we are second only to Texas. So this is, again, a major reform. But let me speak for a moment to current headlines. And Dante Wright, I'm struggling to make sure that I honor the individuals whose lives have recently been taken. My understanding of the circumstances of this young man being pulled over had to do with, I think, something dangling from the rearview mirror. We've all been appalled at the footage coming out of Windsor, Virginia, that took place approximately 6 months ago, when an Army lieutenant who was following Virginia law that's been in place for a long time, particularly for women who were being on the highways, were being pulled over by a fake law enforcement in the middle of the night to their extreme danger. So the law on the books is that you may proceed until it's safe, which is exactly what the Army lieutenant did to a brightly lit place. And all he was being pulled over for was the fact that the temporary license plate was displayed and taped to his back window rather than taped to the middle of the back bumper. Those are just two of the issues that all fall under the category of pretext stops. Pretext stops basically are, I can describe them two ways. The pretext is that you've done this wrong thing, I'm pulling you over, but the real pretext is looking for another crime, an excuse to be able to search the vehicle. But the other reality of it is at the heart of driving while black. And what we did in the special session, it became effective March 1, was change, I believe, a total of a dozen different offenses, which are still offenses on the books. But you can't be pulled over for that offense. It is a secondary offense if you were speeding, etc., and you also had expired plates, and you had something dangling from that might obstruct your view, and you had tinted windows, etc. Then you could be charged for that, but not the pretext for pulling you over with, again, a law enforcement motivation that might be highly questionable. So that change was one of several that we made during this special session. There are others that I could, again, there are so many others, but let me just give you another one as a flavor for the others, a bill that I carried. If you looked at the Virginia statutes, the code in the criminal section, you would see all kinds of categories of crime. And under each one of those categories, there are numerous ways in which that can be charged, except for robbery. Robbery hasn't been changed since, I believe it's 1968. It sits as one offense that you can be sentenced anywhere from 5 years to life. And in fact, in our prison system, and that's what I was double checking here because it's still hard for me to believe since I just saw this graph recently, that if you combine all the drug offenses and you look and you compare it to robbery, both of them are equally represented in our prison system. The number of people who are serving prison time for robbery, the number of people who under the war on drugs, etc., are serving time for drugs. So what I was able to pass is breaking it into 4 categories. Still, I believe it's 20 to life if it involves serious bodily injury. I've forgotten now exactly the range for the next one, but if it involves a firearm, then that's the next category. And I think that's a class 3 felony. But then the next 2 categories, while it's still possible to do 5 to 10 or 5 to 20 or 5 to 10, It involves the first category if there is a weapon involved other than a firearm. And it's visible. You've actually seen it. Compared to the last category, which is a threat, give me your money or, and you could have your finger in the pocket and assume that maybe you have a gun, but it's no visible weapon. That's the very lowest category. It's still possible for 5 years, but it's not doesn't jump on up after that. In addition, that means that I also was able to change the law so the bottom 2 categories no longer does a juvenile who's convicted of robbery, currently 5 to life, has to be, no matter what the age, has to be tried as an adult. And that's absolutely the prison pipeline. So now in those 2 latter categories, only if the Commonwealth Attorney petitions the court, what might you go forward as an adult, but in almost all cases, it's going to be a situation where it'll be the Juvenile and Domestic Relations court services, etc., that will deal with the individual. The record will still be there. So this is when I keep on adding these things, these are all the nuances of trying to make sure that we're still dealing with public safety. All of the issues, and I don't know if you've gotten involved with the loud muffler issue, and I could go on in questions on that, but all of the current reckless driving and all of these other things that might endanger anybody on the highways are still in place. But pure safety infractions as far as the vehicle is concerned are ones that we made secondary. So that again, we could look at the actual arrest records, the actual incidents out there on the highways and what's happening, and the reality of what's behind driving while black and what might happen to an individual tragically too often again and again and again. That is what we did in those areas of justice reform, as well as some of the very big areas of justice reform. While George will be able to fill in if there are questions, particular chapter and verse, because this is another one where I can't remember everything we did. But essentially, when it comes to voting, what we did was go from almost the bottom in the nation in the difficulty in voting in Virginia to being in the top 10 in the most recent ranking as far as the access to be able to vote and vote absentee. And I will also briefly say that during the regular session, another major aspect that is an ongoing aspect is bringing reality to what we did in the previous session under the House Democrat majority working with the Senate, is making such major changes on Earth Day in climate change and carbon emissions. And so we continued that work. In particular, I was very much involved in how we handle incentives for electric vehicles, because now that we have a number of things in place about energy generation, and obviously a need to really move forward and enforce those, as well as the state corporations commission's oversight of how rates are used to create wind energy and make sure that we are able to bring solar generation into the grid so that it can be used and not just limited to the house that is generating it. But we also then are now trying to deal with transportation, which is another major element of carbon emissions, and particularly when it comes to the real results that will get more people into electric vehicles, both the issues of charging stations as well as the cost of the vehicles, and trying to open it up so that more people get into electric vehicles rather than just those who can afford it, through carefully targeting the tax rebate, which, as Chairman of Finance Committee, is one of my missions, that you make sure that each one of these tax credits, tax deductions, is effective, not just giving money, but making sure that we're spending it as effectively as the money committees would do if they were appropriating. So I've said more than enough in several broad areas. George, it's all yours.
Well, I'll focus particularly on the budget issues and sort of the whole economic situation we have in Virginia. Forgot to turn my microphone back on. It looks good, but it doesn't work if you don't turn it on. So, but this might be a little better here, so thank you. But anyway, when the pandemic hit last year, initially there was panic about what it would do to the economy in Virginia and to our revenues and our ability to be able to fund the things that we had just done. Because we ran a little overtime, just a few days overtime last year, and passed the budget on a Thursday. And I think by the next Monday we had a pandemic shutdown, basically moving into lockdown. So as soon as we passed the budget, there was concerns that we were not going to be able to fund it with the resources we would have. However, what I can tell you is that initially the expectation was that we were going to be in the hole on the budget by up to $2.8 billion, which would have been devastating to a lot of programs, a lot of services throughout the Commonwealth if that had fully materialized. What we did was at our veto session in April, and actually it was this day last year, April 22nd, when we had that veto session, what we did in that veto session was froze a lot of the spending that were spending increases or new spending items that had not been in the previous budget. That gave us some ability to be able to go forward with an expectation from a lot of people that when we would come back in July or August and address the budget issue again, and probably have to make more cuts to the budget as we began to see what was happening. However, what happened has been almost the actual opposite of what had been anticipated. Our economy in Virginia did not fall apart, and we are still doing quite well economically, and much better than most states, and better than nearly every single state that has a large population the size of Virginia or greater. So consequently, our economies have been in pretty good shape. However, there have been a large number of people who worked in certain areas in the economy that really struggled and are continuing to struggle in many instances. Particularly the hospitality industry, dealing with motels, hotels, restaurants, all those types of things. That's the number one industry that was hit the hardest of all, and where a lot of people lost jobs and have been struggling ever since that time. Some of those are starting to come back now, and there has been an uptick just in the last month in terms of number of jobs in the hospitality industry, so there is some rebound occurring. But there were a lot of other areas, some retail areas and others, where there were a lot of people who either suffered loss of job or reduction in the number of hours that they worked to be able to support their families. However, by the time we have a body that's called the Governor's Advisory Commission on Revenue Estimates, trying to figure out what our revenues are going to be for the coming year, the coming period of time. That group meets a couple of times a year at least, and one of the times we meet is generally in July. And being on the Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee, that's one of the jobs I have is working on that. Well, actually, by the time we got to July, even though the revenues had plummeted in April and May of last year, by the time we got to that meeting in July, the June numbers had come in, and the June 2020 revenues were actually higher than the June 2019 revenues. So we're already just in the third month of the pandemic beginning to see some positive signs. And I got as much data as I could prior to that meeting that occurred in July. And we went into that meeting, and some of the experts said that we have a Bureau of Economists too that provide projections, and they were projecting a further downturn in the economy, a further downturn in our revenue projections. And there are a lot of business people who are part of that, as well as legislators that are on there. So we and I both work on to deal with those issues. At that meeting, I was sort of the outlier, that most people were predicting some further softening of the revenues and some challenges that we would have to face and some cuts that we would have to make to the budget to be able to deal with that. I looked at enough data, however, that I was pretty well convinced that actually we were already starting the recovery in terms of the economy overall and the situation we had as it relates to revenue for the state budget. And so I took a more optimistic note than anybody else in that meeting. There's about 45 people in the meeting, so I was the real outlier. And said, I think rather than going down further and having a reduction in revenues for fiscal 21, which we're going to finish up in about 2 months now, that rather than going down further and decreasing from the revenues that we had in fiscal 20, that we're going to have an increase. It's probably not going to be huge, but I think there is going to be a substantial increase, a real increase in revenues there. So a lot of people sort of dismiss me as the young person who's suddenly gotten in here and just sees everything's rosy. Turned out I was wrong, but I was wrong only in the respect that even I, who was the most optimistic of everybody, was still too pessimistic. So I figured we were probably going to be 4 to 5% up in revenues. In reality, we are now poised to be up in revenues this year more than 10% from last year. So we are already getting a huge benefit out of how the economy is reacting. And part of it was the actions that were taken early in the pandemic, and particularly the passage of the CARES Act at the federal level, which provided a lot of funding that businesses were able to go in and initially borrow money, but then be able to get that forgiven under certain circumstances. The circumstances was they didn't lay anybody off, and that they were able to maintain all their employees, so that they were not laying people off or cutting the hours of their employees. And in many instances, the businesses did it, even when they didn't have enough work for all these employees. So a lot of them said, we're going to do the right thing and try to maintain, the economy, but also provide support for our employees and try to help them not be put in a position where they don't have the money to pay the mortgage or whatever else the challenges they're facing there. But also what we began to see was several of the business leaders across the Commonwealth said, yes, this is going to hurt my bottom line this year, but I'd rather keep the employees I have who are doing a good job, even if I don't have work for them to do, and I'm paying them even though they're not producing something that's providing revenue for the company, because these are the people that I can rely on in the future. I would rather do that than lay these people off and then have to come back 6 months from now, hire new people that I don't know as well, and have these people then have to take time to learn the job, to be able to do things, and probably more of them leave their job than the existing employees I have now. So the business community, and particularly the larger corporations in Virginia, made those types of decisions that put us in a very good position. So consequently, we were able to come back when we went to the session that was in the fall, where we came up with the budget in basically September and October, to be able to come up with a budget excuse me, that restored most of the major items that we had put in the budget back in March in 2020 when we passed it, that had been frozen in April when there was great concern about the reductions that were going to happen there. What has happened now is that we continue on this path, so when we came back down in January, February this year, we added back much more of the funding. So we have basically virtually everything that was in the second year of the buy-in, because we do a 2-year budget, that will start in July of this year and then run through June of next year, has been restored to the budget, and we've even added some things. And we also dealt with a lot of the challenges and opportunities that we saw coming from it, from the situation, and some extent coming from some of the federal monies. We did provide rent support and utility support for people with utility who fall behind being able to pay their utilities. So a lot of the people who were in the hospitality industry or other types of things where they were losing their jobs or working for fewer hours have been able to get support to be able to help them get through this difficult period. And that continues to this day, and it's going to probably continue for at least several more months, probably through at least the end of this year, to help people rebuild their lives as the jobs continue to become be more numerous there. So we did that. We also, and I worked heavily on this with Dominion, is to have Dominion take some of the profits they had and be able to write off the debts that were owed by people who were more than 30 days behind on their bills. And they did that twice, once for those who were behind by 30 days or more by the end of September, and then again by those who are 30 days or more behind by the end of December. So we've been able to help people who are falling behind on their utilities, so we're not getting their utilities cut off or anything. And we also, so that the support for the individuals through things such as the rent relief and the mortgage relief programs and the utility relief programs and the business relief programs, those all help tremendously in this situation. And the federal money turned out, a lot of the smaller businesses had been unable to access some of the money under the PPP program that was set up to help there. So we set up our own program in Virginia with Virginia money that, not using, since we didn't have the federal money for that, to be able to help a lot of the smaller businesses be able to work with their employees and do things to help there. So I think in the end, we've come up with a very good proposal and a very good system. And I think our long-term economic future in Virginia is extraordinary right now. And I think that a lot of people, including my colleague here, who's worked with the Finance Committee, we'll be working on a subcommittee that's going to try to shape some things to help move it forward even a little bit more this year and to keep going in the right direction on things. So it's been great, and we've been able to meet the needs of people. And in addition, at the same time, we have been able to put a lot more money into mental health services, which we've historically been short on in Virginia. We've been able to deal with some of the issues in Medicaid. We've been one of a relatively small number of states that has not entitled adult Medicaid patients to be able to get dental health care. And that has been highly visible in some ways in Virginia, and that they're down in Southwest Virginia, every summer they've had basically a 3-day weekend provision of services, free medical services. And for years we've had a lot of volunteers, doctors from up here, Dr. Hazel when he was Secretary of Health and Human Resources and the orthopedist up in Northern Virginia. He would go down there and work with the people there. They would provide a lot of services to a lot of people who didn't have care. Since we did Medicaid expansion in 2018, now when those free clinics are held in those outdoor settings in Southwest Virginia, there is no line for people who need medical care because the people who previously were coming now have coverage through Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. So we have a lot of those things that happen. The only service that is overwhelmed down there now when they have these clinics is the dental service. And so you see a lot of people, and they end up with buckets and buckets of teeth that the dentists have taken out from people there. Come July of this year, we will have an adult dental health program for all Medicaid patients. And so we will have that coverage there. We will no longer have a lot of people losing their teeth because they had not gotten proper dental care. And I can tell you that just this week, I've encountered some guy who works at Virginia Hospital Center in Arlington, where my mother-in-law was for a couple of days this week. And he's a patient care assistant. He's about 40 years old, I'd say. He said he has 13 teeth left in his mouth. And he said, when I was growing up, we were poor and we never got dental care, period. And it was not something they expected. So we're doing a lot of things to help people that have needs for these services. And I think our budget is moving in the right direction, and we put a lot of money in education services and other types of things. We also are being much more intentional, and Delegate Watts talked about making sure we do the right things to get the right benefit out of some of the things. One of the things that used to happen was that we didn't put a whole lot of money in workforce development training. So we figured the businesses would do that, the people who needed would access things. That was not the smartest way to go. When we now have a system set up where we've gone from being one of the bottom states to one of the top states in terms of workforce development issues, and have programs that are helping people get trained. And in reality, in much of Virginia now, there are jobs that are sitting vacant because we historically have not had trained the people for those types of jobs. Just in Northern Virginia, we still have a lot of tech jobs that are vacant because we can't get enough people who have those types of training. So we're making the intentional investments so that the people can get the jobs, the businesses can achieve more than what they're doing now because they have qualified people to fill those jobs. And all of us benefit because of what it does for our economy as a whole. So I think I'm proud to be here with Delegate Watts and others who can work with, the two of us work with others who've been able to address things. And Virginia is moving, I tell you, strongly in the right direction on things. So.
And as always, I've got another stat. So what George was just saying, several years ago, there was a study of what our workforce needs were. For every PhD, we need 2 bachelor's degrees, but we need 7 who have more than high school but less than 4 years of college. The certificate type of person, whether it's IT or it's a plumber or it's in healthcare. And that's what the program that George was talking about is directed at. And in those fields, it will be possible to get a community college certificate degree tuition-free. And again, it's very, very much pointed at good income jobs and meeting real needs out there. So, okay, so all of the House is up for re-election. And in 2017, the Democrats tried to get people running in every race that we possibly could. The result was a net gain of 5 seats. In 2019, we did essentially the same thing, and by God, on election night, we had 55 people. We had not just the majority, we almost had the majority. We lost it by a coin toss in 2017, but we had a 5-person majority in the House, and I will speak about how important that is in just a moment. But this year, the Republicans have taken a page out of that and say, okay, if the Democrats were so successful by throwing someone into each and every race, we're going to do exactly the same thing. So I've lost count of exactly where we are now, but let's say for the sake of discussion that at least 2/3 of the Democrats, at least 2/3 of the seats are being challenged by Republicans. At least 2/3. It might be higher than that. It might be in the 80s. So we have races going on everywhere, in part to keep people busy. Even if you don't think you can defeat her, no, not a problem. We're going to keep her busy so that we can pour our resources into the most vulnerable seats. And vulnerable seats, when it comes to the House, now back to that 55. We have 22 members on each one of our committees. So when you apply 55% to 22, if you come out with a fraction above another seat, you get the other seat. So by 1 person on every one of the House committees, you have 13 Democrats and 9 Republicans. If we lose 1 seat, that goes to 12-10. And on any vote, and I think without exception, everything that I talked about was a partisan vote. So if you lose 1 vote when it's 12-10, it's not getting out of committee. So this is why, as to continue now on some of the more challenging reforms that, in particular, what I will say in my next 2 comments, when it comes to those issues, that's where we really need to have a informed and really focused discussions. And so with that, let me actually go into another aspect of these remarks. Yeah, I chair Finance Committee. In the General Assembly, that is the only tax writing committee, because on the Senate side, it's Finance and Appropriations, and quite frankly, while there certainly are informed discussions of tax policy, that's not the sole focus. There's so many other challenges in the budget that actually looking at tax policy in and of itself is not something that has anywhere near the focus as it could have in the House. I say could have because what I inherit is 20 years of the first thing that the Republicans did when they came into control 20 years ago was to change the makeup of the House Finance Committee so that it always had a majority of members who had signed Grover Norquist's no tax pledge. I will never vote for a tax increase. And Grover Norquist has always interpreted that if you have tax reform, by definition, reform means if I'm going to reduce somebody's taxes, it's going to be increasing someone else's taxes so that the revenue stays even. Well, that was never a problem for the majority of those who had signed the no tax pledge because it was starve the beast. So therefore, K through 12, for example, has by some definition still not recovered from the cuts made in 2008 with the recession then. Not to mention the kind of issues that Virginia has to deal with because of our extreme spread between wealth and poverty. So with that, also as the tax writing committee, not only was there really no focus on reform, many of the members who were on the committee, because they would vote not to increase taxes, also had no interest in taxes. Boring, I'm just here to say no. So that issues that for some reason, and now I turn to some of my League of Women Voters colleagues in the room, for some reason from the get-go, those 15 years as the active citizen, particularly through the League of Women Voters, were always on the budget side, because I'm a numbers nerd at heart, that's just the way I was born. And with that then, I know the issues of real estate tax assessment, and particularly, again, I wish I had another chart with me, the shift that has occurred in household spending. So the number one expense is housing. Food has really fallen down. Transportation's grown a little bit, clothing way down. And yet here we are financing our local governments. 70% of Virginia's population lives in counties like Fairfax, even though we're over 1 million people, dependent upon the real estate tax, the colonial tax base. So I did get that change made last year so that we now have the same taxing powers as cities after almost 100 years that the counties have been frozen. But there is so much more to do, and I now need to quickly move forward and say that as George was describing, looking at what might happen in Virginia under COVID, at the same time, I was there reading everything I possibly could, locked down like everybody else, so thank God for the internet that you can keep on keeping on, reading everything I possibly could so that if we needed to raise revenue, it would be done in a rational, focused basis to go towards more equity and a better tax base for Virginia than what we currently have. And what we currently have, 70% of our revenue in Virginia comes from the individual income tax. And I could now go on for the next 20 minutes and discuss that issue, which I will not, except to say that in that process and over those months, I have become more and more informed and committed from those early years on of what we need to do in making a much fairer as well as more modern tax system than we currently have. But obviously that, again, talk about boring, this is one that if you talk in the normal campaign about, you don't get very far. But it is one of those challenges if we're really going to deal with the inequities that have occurred. The country has not just become more and more polarized philosophically, economically, definitely. Starting all the way back from the Kerner report of many, many years ago, we have two societies, and our taxes are one of those issues that needs to be addressed in dealing with that gulf, but also then in looking at the resources that are needed, particularly in my book, for K through 12 especially. But I'm also going to say the third thing that I wanted to use this time for another challenge ahead where I desperately need that extra person on committee. Again, I'm still talking about the election. This is what it's all about, the future progress, not saying, oh, well, we've done it. Okay, and voter turnout will be as critical as it ever was, because every one of these things could be turned around in a heartbeat. We finally recaptured one gun a month as far as limits on handgun sales. And that took, what, 15 years since it was rescinded almost immediately. So back to the other aspect I wanted to say, I'm hoping, I had a very, very active session, not success, but success is building this coalition. After 20 years of trying to bring Virginia in line with almost every other state in having nursing home staffing standards for direct care. And COVID is this is another very harsh spotlight that COVID shone. And to me, the following absolutely proves the case of why we need staffing standards. Virginia, one of the few states that doesn't have staffing standards. Whether you looked at the summer when you had a couple of outbreaks, incredible outbreaks in some of the nursing homes, or whether you look in December, looking at the whole year, the proportion of COVID deaths in Virginia that happened in nursing homes is almost 30% higher than the average nationwide. They're almost 30% higher, and that speaks directly to me, not only to the lack of adequate staffing, which helps deal with many of the issues that have to be dealt with in all the protocols of COVID, but also the fact that because of this, you have a lot of direct care providers who are underpaid. They have a double job, and they bring in that from the other job, exposing the population as a whole. So that again, the coalition has been growing and growing and growing as it's known that my 20-year effort, what I have been trying to do in this field. And the bottom line is, I'm not sure exactly where we are now that we finally expanded Medicaid for the general population, but forever we've been essentially 48th, 49th in Medicaid spending nationwide. And how that plays out in nursing homes, to be admitted into a nursing home as a Medicaid patient, and approximately 2/3 of those in our nursing homes, approximately 20,000 individuals are there on Medicaid, and to get into a nursing home on Medicaid, you have to not be able to perform at least 2 functions of the 5 basic functions of daily living. For essentially, you can't feed yourself. Essentially, you can't get up and go to the bathroom yourself. All the more need for the direct care services. But to do that, it will cost money, even though it'll be matched 50-50, essentially, by the feds. It will still, for basic standards that were documented federally about at least a dozen years ago, maybe 15, of at least 4 hours of direct care out of every 24. That'll cost, I'm keeping my numbers round, that'll cost $40 million ongoing, annually, state matched by another 40 coming from the feds. We're that far behind. So the challenge then to come up with that on an annual basis, and now particularly to you all, I don't want any rumors that if I am championing, as I have more than once, having a Virginia estate tax comparable to the federal, I'm talking about taxable estates above $25 million, excluding farms and family-held businesses. $25 million of a taxable estate, the vast bulk of which is capital gains, which passes to the next generation at current value. Therefore, the capital gains is never taxed. So it's not double taxation. It is, as I've said to some audiences where I get into it, if Dave and I are lucky, we'll still have a couple of 401ks when we die. But we will have paid taxes on those. This is what we're dealing as far as this major tax loophole. Bottom line, about 20 estates a year could pay for 20,000 individuals on Medicaid in nursing homes, giving them the basic care of 4 hours of direct care a day. And that is all about a future that to me is, while it's much broader to have expanded Medicaid to the general population, it is every bit as desperate a need that has been so long unaddressed in Virginia. And that's also what, just an example of a number of areas where a thoughtful, rational, nuanced, compassionate approach is at stake in the election and the control of the House, and particularly not losing a single seat. So when you are asked to write those postcards that are as important as they ever were, everything that you did the last couple of elections, please stay with your shoulder against the wheel and make it happen, because it really does matter in so many other examples. So, we're questions, right? Do we still have time? I mean,
Yes.
George and I are both nerds at heart. We love what we do, so it's really hard to give you a 25-word or less.
Well, you have so much work that you do that it's inevitable that we're not going to be able to hear about all of the good that you've done for us. But just speaking on behalf of the people here at Green Spring, the work that the General Assembly did to make voting easier has been enormous. The 45 days of early voting, the finally no excuse absentee voting, and we had an election office drop box here in November, so that people who had gotten their absentee ballots, filled them out, but were afraid to mail them for fear they wouldn't get there in time, they could bring them to the drop box, and they went directly to the elections office. So that was huge. Senator Barker, Delegate Watts, thank you so much for being here with us today. If COVID allows, we certainly will not wait more than a year to have you back. In the meantime, we are very much aware that there is an election this November. Virginia has an election every year, so you never have to wonder, is this one of the years? It's every year.